You were maybe that's a full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
You're tired. You got that. Judy.
There she is.
Judy. She's just watching.
Judy.
Let's make it back up.
Is that going to get like what I have to say? Momentarily.
Anything to say is now. Between us and then.
Right, well, public record question.
So we're good.
Technically, I'm talking to myself. Transfers.
Right.
It says I'm typically.
Okay. Great.
Generally speaking.
Good evening and welcome to the September 27th, 2023 Long Range Planning Committee meeting, hybrid meeting for River House. This is meeting number 1 in a series. I'm Jim Lantomi. I'm chairing this LRPC, and we'll be holding a hybrid public meeting which enables remote electronic participation as legally authorized by the Code of Virginia per the Planning Commission's electronic meeting policy that was adopted on July 7th, 2022. Do we have any commissioners planning commissioners participating remotely at this time?
No.
If so, raise your virtual hand.
None.
And none on the phone? Okay, great, so everybody's here in person. At this time, I'd like to orient everyone to a hybrid environment and cover a few specifics about how tonight's meeting will be run. Members of the public may attend the meeting here in person or electronically by using the Microsoft Teams link provided on the LRPC web pages, the county's events calendar, and the email notifications sent to LRPC email subscribers. Additionally, there is a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. Let's see. For our virtual attendees using Microsoft Teams, please turn off your video feed. I'll address when it's appropriate to turn it on in a bit. The Microsoft Teams meeting chat is active to serve 2 purposes. For participants who need technical assistance and for other attendees to pose brief clarifying questions to the larger audience. While these will be monitored, they will not be formally acknowledged, and staff may address these comments as appropriate. The Teams chat should not be used for discussion or any inappropriate statements. Those who are planning to provide public comment will still need to do so. That'll be at the end of the meeting, as the chat will not serve as that opportunity. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony period. I'd also like to remind everybody who is in the room here right now to speak up slowly and clearly, and because the microphones are above us, that will allow the virtual participants to hear you better. In addition, if you'd like to share your screen, please request permission from the LRPC chair prior to doing so. For planning commissioners, none are here virtually, and none are on the phone, so I'll have to go through that. Additional notes for members of the public who'd like to provide feedback and comment. Unlike the Planning Commission's regular meetings, the LRPC agenda items are not public hearings. Therefore, public comment is at the LRPC's discretion after the committee discussion is ended. I will be exercising my discretion to allow public comment tonight. You'll be called on at the end of the meeting to speak on tonight's agenda item. Speaking time allotted will depend on the number of speakers we'll be having, but no more than 2 minutes. I'll call on speakers at the end of the meeting and will ask staff to let me know if we have virtual attendees who'd like to provide comment. Staff will acknowledge speakers in the Teams chat. Please indicate in the chat that you'd like to provide comment, and your name will be added to our list of speakers. Members of the public attending virtually will speak first, followed by people in the room here. When virtual attendees are called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon located on the Teams command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you, but you will be muted, however, when your time has concluded. As an alternative, public comment is available and may be provided on the public comment form posted on the LRPC webpage. Lastly, this is a public forum. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Freedom of Information Act requirements. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's go around the room and introduce ourselves. As I mentioned, I am Jim Lantelmi, Chair of the LRPC and a member of the Planning Commission.
Okay, spot to talk to the ceiling here.
Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Tony Strider. I'm with the Planning Commission.
Cattery Garcia, President of Arlington Ridge Civic Association.
Peter Robertson of the Planning Commission.
Hi, Matt Gibbon with JVG Smith.
Faizan Qureshi with JVG Smith.
Kendrick Whitmore, I'm a land use attorney with VAPL.
Nick Giacobbe, Aurora Highlands Civic Association.
Pam Van Hine, Pedestrian Advisory Committee.
Jeffrey Williams, Crystal Pentagon Cities Council, and 30-year River House resident.
Steve Sockwell, Forestry and Natural Resources Commission.
Chris Adams, I'm on the member of the Arlington Ridge Community Association.
Okay, you're a member, but
Not-
she's representing.
She's representing. I'm the neighbor.
Then you sit back there.
Oh, sorry.
And engaged.
Okay, so you have to be back there.
I'm Leo Starley with the Planning Commission.
Matt Matuzek, Arlington County Planning Division.
Adam Watson, Arlington County Planning Division.
Okay, now we'll go around in the room.
Gray Fauver, I'm with JVG Smith.
Ryan Delaney, Arlington County Parks and Recreation.
Barrett Eastwood, Hybrid Architecture.
Sharon Bradley, Bradley Site Design.
Janet Meyer, BCT Design Group.
And Murphy Antoine, Torty Gallison Partners, Architects and Planners. And I've introduced.
Very good. Okay, now that we know who we all are, we can now move on to the agenda item. And our first up will be the applicant. Put your slides all ready and ready to talk because the floor is yours.
So, good evening. Sorry. Real quick, is there anybody online that we need to introduce? I see Chris Slatt.
Commissioner Berkey joined as well.
Oh, okay, Commissioner Berkey, good. Remember, Commissioner Berkey, when it's time for you to talk, raise your virtual hand. Commissioner Slatt, welcome. I presume you're representing the Transportation Commission. You're still muted, Chris.
Yes, good evening. Chris Slatt, representing Transportation Commission.
Very good. I see Judy Freshman is there. Are you a guest or just representing?
I'm Judy Freshman, representing Crystal City Civic Association.
Very good. Welcome, Judy. And who's that now? Cindy Lewin.
Hi, Cindy Lewin here on behalf of the Climate Change, Energy and Environment Commission. I'll be an SPR. I'm the official person, C2E2.
Thank you. Welcome. Any other commissioners? Jane, keep it on. Jane, do you want to introduce yourself? Ms. Kim?
Hi, Jane Kim, DES Transportation.
Yes, I'm Michael Collin.
Okay, and I have Chris is on too.
Yeah, Chris Kreider.
Chris Kreider, Michael Kelley.
Chris Kreider, Urban Design Section. Good evening.
Welcome.
Good evening. Michael Cullen, Arlington DPR.
Okay.
Laura Shaw.
Laura Shaw.
Laura Schaub, Urban Design.
Urban Design, great. Thank you. Welcome. Okay, now that we have everybody, all the virtual attendees introduced, we can now move with the presentation and.
Sorry about the false start.
First.
So good evening. My name is Faizan Qureshi. On behalf of the applicant team, we are really pleased to present our vision for the River House neighborhood site plan tonight. So before we even began planning for this project, we established a set of guiding principles to help inform the design. And I want to highlight just a few of these before we move into the meat of our presentation. The first one that's the most important is listening and engaging. So since the sector plan was adopted last year, we've held over 20 community events, not just with our existing residents, but with the broader community as well. These have ranged from virtual and in-person open houses to walking tours, informal coffee chats, even a taco truck night. And we received a lot of great feedback, but we heard two themes sort of consistently throughout. One was a desire for a mix of heights, and the other was a desire for a diversity of housing types. And we've really embraced these and included these in our project. And the way we achieve these is by preserving the existing apartment buildings and introducing new mid-rise multifamily buildings, rental townhomes, for sale condos, and even senior housing. The connective tissue underlying all of this is our open space network. And two key elements of this that I want to quickly touch on. One is this notion of stoop culture. And what that is integrating the building architecture as well as the open space to provide opportunities for residents to meet one another. The other key element is preserving and conserving the forested areas throughout the site. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sharon Bradley with Bradley Site Design to talk more about our open space.
Thanks, Faison. I'm Sharon Bradley, principal of Bradley Site Design. I founded BSD almost 30 years ago, specifically to connect people with nature and communities of all types. So we're particularly excited to be in the River House neighborhood, especially given the biophilic goals of the sector plan. We started with the sector plan requirements, and here we see the existing conditions. One of the first things we did was to survey and evaluate the condition of the existing trees, especially along the western and the southern edges. We identified the viable native trees, and we will be working to properly conserve them. We're adopting a forest management approach and expanding the forested area eastward to provide a much more significant woodland area. As you can see in the chart of the upper right, we're not just meeting the sector plan requirements for canopy coverage, we're exceeding it with significant additional tree canopy coverage consisting of healthy native trees for a long-term forest solution. We're connecting those natural assets with the green ribbon network. So we're beginning to create this biophilic fabric that's woven throughout the site. We're maximizing the benefit of the woodlands by threading the green ribbon through them, bringing people into those natural environments and providing a diverse set of immersive experiences along the green ribbon corridors. We've been studying the topography extensively, and even though there's a significant change in elevation as you move from east to west up to the top of Arlington Ridge, we've created a green ribbon network that is multimodal and completely ADA compliant. That's required in the sector plan, but we always want to provide universal access. In most cases, we're able to achieve that without ramps, as you can see by this color-coded diagram. So the pathways are integrated fully and seamlessly into the landscape. Adding another layer to our biophilic fabric, this plan shows the planned open spaces. Now you're starting to see the framework created by the natural assets of the site. So together, the forests, the green ribbon corridors, and the green open spaces start to shape the places where the buildings can go. And you're starting to see the buildings ghosted in here. We studied the sector plan requirements for canopy and vegetation coverage extensively also. And this diagram shows we're meeting and exceeding those requirements in all areas, both tree canopy and vegetation coverage. We were asked to calculate the coverage if we were to delete the Virginia Highlands Park expansion. And the good news is that we are still able to exceed the canopy coverage and vegetation coverage requirements. Similarly, we're meeting and exceeding the open space requirements from the sector plan with the green fabric that started our design process. We've identified over 2.5 acres of green open space, which we'll develop through the public space master planning process. The architecture teams will now present their work in the land base, and I'll turn it over now to Barrett Eastwood of Hybrid Architecture to discuss Land Bay S.
Thank you, Sharon. My name is Barrett Eastwood, and I'm an architect at Hybrid Architecture. Hybrid is a Seattle-based architecture firm that focuses on neighborhood scale infill design. JBG Smith approached us because of our specialty in this housing type to provide similar design concepts to the River House neighborhood. Here are a couple examples of recent townhouse projects. I'd like to highlight the scale of the projects and how we've utilized entries, stoops, decks, and balconies to fit in with the surrounding context. To orient you, this is the overall River House site plan. We're focused on the edges adjacent to Aurora Highlands and Arlington Ridge neighborhoods. To get an idea of the existing conditions, we're going to change perspective and look at the site from the southwest above Arlington Ridge. As you can see, the site is largely occupied by parking that terraces down from the western property line to the east. The sector plan allows for up to 16 stories. Rather than seeking maximum density, JBG Smith's goal was instead to maximize the diversity of housing types and ask Hybrid to design this part of the neighborhood as townhomes. To achieve this, it was critical to lower the height of the development to one that is appropriate for townhouses. By lowering the height to 3 and 4 stories, it has helped weave the edges of this larger project into the neighboring context. We then looked at multimodal requirements of the sector plan and added vehicular and bicycle connections and introduced connections to Kent, Lynn, and South Joy streets. We also added a loop road along the western edge of the site to access additional townhouses along this edge. Next, we added a green ribbon network, providing both connections from Virginia Highlands Park to the Hume Stair and through the southern edge of to the central portion of the site, including connection from the green ribbon up to 15th Street. The massing was then further broken into smaller blocks or courtyards around which the townhouses are organized. Shown here, you can see the massing with different roof forms that are typical of residential neighborhoods. This slide highlights both the retained and new tree planting opportunities on the site. It also highlights how the new street trees and landscape courtyards help further integrate the design into the neighboring context. Additionally, we found locations along the green ribbon and in between the townhomes to provide opportunities for landscape and pocket parks within the design. We've also begun to add additional architectural detail to help break down the townhouse massing further. You can see here individual units taking on unique characteristics and forms. Finally, we'd like to share a couple of renderings to help describe the quality of the architecture. This image shows the quality of a typical street. You can see here the diversity of unit types characterized primarily by overall shape, facade materials, stoops, and recessed entries. And the final image shows how the same architectural concepts continue within the development. We thank you for the opportunity to present this design tonight, and now I'll be handing the presentation over to Janet Meyer, who will be presenting the central section of the site.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Janet Meyer, a principal with BCT Design Group. We are a full-service architecture, interiors, and planning firm headquartered in Baltimore. Our firm was engaged by JBG Smith because of our expertise in senior living and mid-rise multifamily housing. At the onset of our involvement, one of JBG's goals for River House was, as Barrett said, to diversify the housing types offered. And for our parcel, JBG Smith specifically asked BCT to find a way to incorporate senior housing and for-sale condos, and to do so in a way that integrates them into the neighborhood. The central parcel focuses on the neighborhood section in and around the existing Ashley and Potomac buildings. Within the central parcel, we focused on 3 development areas that were shaped by the green ribbon, a desired multimodal path of network of paths and roads, and the existing River House buildings. We started by reviewing the sector plan allowable heights, which offered on the north side of the green ribbon upwards of 250 feet, and to the south upward of 16 stories. And as we developed the concepts for each of these 3 buildings, we wanted to right-size the building massing for the housing types that were requested, as one of the goals was to not maximize density, but to create the best shape and form for the housing type. We continued to develop the massing and vary the roof lines, opening up to the green ribbon towards Virginia Highlands Park, and make a strong connection as desired in the sector plan with the for-sale condo building, the senior housing building, and our neighborhood multifamily building. From a vertical design and architectural standpoint, we wanted to give each building its own identity within the neighborhood while maintaining a contextual tie to the existing mid-century modern architecture of the existing River House buildings. So in the next few slides, you can start to see the architectural character that we've developed throughout the site, where there's a contextual nature that really ties back to the existing buildings. But each building starts to have its own identity and really starts to be shaped by these green ribbon spaces. So moving into the next slide, you can start to see further these buildings along the streetscape at Kent Street, extended looking north, and then moving further into the site at a prominent midpoint of the green ribbon, looking towards the east and northeast at the condo building. Again, a varying architectural character. And then at the southernmost portion of the site, starting to see the step down of the scale of the buildings to a 7-story multifamily building adjacent to the townhomes, and then further south into the smaller scale single family homes. With this, I'll pass it along to Murphy.
Thanks, Janet. I'm Murphy Antoine. I'm an architect and planner with and president of Torty Gallison Partners. You might know some of our work from the region or other places in the county, including across the street at 1919 Wilson and even here at Courthouse Plaza. We're part of the JBG Smith team for overall master planning at River House, and also the northern section of the neighborhood that you see here in between the James and the Potomac, across Joyce from Pentagon Row and up the hill to Lynn Street. You can see the public open space portion of the green ribbon in between the two residential mid-rise buildings that are above retail, and how that connects to the green ribbon running north and south along Lynn Street. This takes that plan view and extrudes it to 3 dimensions, illustrating the allowable heights under the sector plan that go up to 250 feet along Joyce. Within that framework, we have proposed mid-rise buildings of 7 stories that you start to see those volumes articulated here as massing. We further carved those back into residential forms. You start to see the residential courtyards. You start to see the amenity wing in front of the Potomac Tower, and hinges and chamfers and notches that respond to Pentagon Row across Joyce, and also the geometry of Joyce Street. From there, we really start to articulate and add the residential bays and balconies, podium lines for the retail portion, a 5-story datum that really carve back and articulate this architecture. And you see that in the context of the neighbors. In the rendering views, you start to see material and color and how that forms the buildings, but also the open space and the green ribbon as it goes up. This is a view from Pentagon Row, looking up the open space connection back and forth to the metro, and then the representative building in the background. The next rendering sort of flips that view, and it's more hovering above Lynn Street, looking down the hill through that open space between the mid-rise apartment buildings and back to Pentagon Row in the background. The final rendering view is a view above Joyce Street. You can see that amenity wing that I spoke of in the massing in front of the Potomac Tower. You can see the residential mid-rise buildings in the context of the Potomac Tower, and again, the representative in the background. So we've talked a bit about the pieces, the neighborhood sections, the south, the central, and the north. Wanted to come back to this overall plan that you can see the illustrative site plan of how that all comes together. And to also take a look at the overall illustrating some of those height diagrams that we talked about in the individual parcels. You see an axonometric view of the sector plan allowed heights in these different parcels and how that gradient happens from north to south as we get to Arlington Ridge and Aurora Highlands, and then the articulated versions of those in the overall site plan. Since submission, we've been working very carefully with staff and having discussions about some of the concerns, and we've done further studies and want to share some of that with you. And to do that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sharon.
Perfect. So we'll start at the southernmost edge and work our way north in our design responses to the concerns that we've heard. We were asked to provide a 40-foot setback along the southern edge. So we've been working with hybrid architecture to make way for a larger green edge. That green edge becomes part of a more significant green network in Land Bay S, as you can see by this slide. We were also asked to explore a rerouting of the green ribbon in Land Bay S so that it flanks Kent Street to create a more fluid north-south path. And so again, we are studying revisions that allow for the entire green ribbon corridor to move along Kent Street. Moving slightly north into Land Bay C, there was a strong desire to create opportunities for view sheds from Kent Street and the Western Hillside down to Virginia Highland Park, as well as a direct path up the hill, up to the 15th Street spur. There's over 30 feet in vertical change in this area, and our 4.1 submission shows a gentle, accessible path that works with the topography and it avoids the existing trees on the hillside. Shifting the path alignment to allow for more promontory points, it tightens the switchbacks, but it does provide more promontory opportunities and up to the Forest Slope and down to Virginia Highland Park. We are still studying this. We understand a direct path is desirable. That red dotted line represents the most direct path, but that exceeds 13% in average and far exceeds ADA compliant routes. And we're exploring a direct path that is also ADA compliant and respects existing trees through this vertical change. We're working with Janet and the BCT team to create those view sheds to the park. And as you can see, building C3 is starting to carve back, creating a chamfer that allows for that view shed. This shows by peeling back the C3 building, where we're allowing for a wider plaza up at Kent Street and a clear view to Virginia Highland Park. Up in Land Bay N, there was a concern about the scale of the space. And so we wanted to explore this further and see what can be accommodated in that space as public open spaces. So as you can see, we have 67 spaces from 67 feet between building face to building face. And as a comparable scale, we wanted to show a familiar space. This is the King Street Streetery that is actually narrower than our space. So this is significantly narrower and still accommodates quite a dynamic set of activities. We wanted to explore further by looking at precedents around the country. And this is a series of images that show similar scaled spaces flanked by residential uses and also providing for vibrant public use. Exploring further, again, we are not designing the space, but we wanted to explore what the opportunities are. We will be refining designs and developing programs through that public process. But we wanted to show what we can do here with a biophilic neighborhood park concept, for example, where it's very immersive.
2-3 minutes.
Got it, thank you. And so moving along, showing how the green ribbon corridor still moves through this space, and then imagining what this biophilic neighborhood park concept can look like, while still accommodating the stoop culture that Faison talked about, so that there are eyes on the space 24/7, and yet still allowing for public spaces. At the other end of the activity spectrum, we wanted to explore what is the maximum that we could accommodate and pull the energy from Pentagon Row westward through these public open spaces in the north, and creating a festival sort of active plaza concept. And in this space, again, accommodating the green ribbon passage, but also creating a space for up to 400 people in a festival type space there. And finally, in the farthest north Land Bay, we heard concerns about that building in the northeast corner. So by removing it, we're able to, as you can see in the right-hand image, create a much larger contiguous open green space. So pulling back out, you can see our 4.1 submission. It's a little bit difficult to see in this slide, but the original alignments of the green ribbon, the canopy edges, and the green open spaces, And then our design response, post-submission study, shows that realignment of the green ribbon, the stronger southern open space, and the open space to the far north.
Thank you, you made it on time.
I'm going to say, that was exactly what we had our daughters here.
Okay, it's now time for the, for staff.
Sure.
Fortunately, this shows much better if anybody's joining remotely, hopefully in our video. So I think it's only us that kind of not getting the sharp, crisp graphics coming across. Again, I'm Matt Matuzek with Arlington County Planning Division, and I'm working alongside several other staff, most of whom are here virtually and in person. And what I wanted to do is really connect some of the dots, because I think we have folks that are joining for the first time, we have folks that have been monitoring this for several years, and I think those who may even consider themselves familiar with the sector plan really benefit from a refresher, and particularly what I'm hoping to achieve is to clarify why we are looking at the last 15 or 20 slides of additional analysis and studies since the July kickoff that we had at Long Ridge Park. So with that, what I wanted to do is cover just process too, because I think it's important to talk about where tonight's meeting fits within the broader context, what are some of the next steps, and I think really start to differentiate the different topics we're going to consider, because we can't do it all in one night. And I think there is a specific and strategic sequencing of order that we want to pursue based on other successful examples of large sites like this one. And then I also want to touch a little bit about the sector plan guidance for this property, which is kind of what led to that additional analysis and some of staff's feedback, and really make sure everybody who's going to be looking at this and part of tonight's conversation really has all the information in front of them to, I think, speak intelligently and make good judgment and consider this further. And then finally, we just wanted to highlight where some of those outstanding items are that we're starting to see progress with, and we hope as this moves forward, we can get to a acceptable solution there.
No, it's just minus the box.
Is that good?
No. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
Yeah, right, there you go.
All right, so process. This will have several different stages. We're beginning with the Long Ridge Planning Committee intentionally because there's just so much to consider on a very large site. And what we wanted to do, if you're familiar with the Crystal City block plan process, make sure that all these different things, the public spaces, the buildings, correspond to each other, and supporting one aspect of it does not necessarily create a conflict with something else in the property. That they're all kind of speaking the same language and are in concert with one another. And I think if we can be successful in doing that for the open space and transportation network, then we can have a much easier and thoughtful discussion about individual buildings, loading docks, parking, the typical site plan review committee discussions that happen later. Somewhere in between and throughout, we are looking to also have a kind of a parallel process to look at the public spaces. This will be something we're going to do in concert with the applicant, but also with our staff and Department of Parks and Recreation, and really start to zoom in on the character and design of those spaces. Since that is not technically something we want the SPRC to be weighing in on completely, there's a different group of stakeholders that should be a part of that process as well. And then finally, public hearings, typical for any site plan, the roadshow of engagement that will happen sometime in 2024. That's a typo on my behalf, sorry. Sequencing that out, if you're more visual like myself, that's another way of displaying that same information. You can see here maybe the benefit of seeing those topics distributed between different meetings. I'm highlighting the one on the left as we are specifically looking at public spaces, building location, and tree canopy. Those are all interrelated, they impact one another. And our plan right now is to make sure that we reserve adequate time in late October to come back and look at the other elements, transportation, parking, and fire access, and perhaps updates to what we consider tonight. So that's currently what our strategy is. We're going to keep reiterating this as draft, subject to change, subject to feedback. As it evolves, we'll keep updating this to make sure everybody's on the same page. So with that, I do want to spend a little bit of time highlighting just the sector plan and what's been approved in February of 2022. I can't believe it's been almost 18 months since that happened. But basically, this is really the framework that was established after another 18-month process to provide the county board criteria and metrics to identify how and under what conditions future growth could happen in Pentagon City. So this sets the stage for what level of density is appropriate based on the urban design of the properties, the public space commitments, the community benefit commitments, and this document helps them make that decision, as well as other commissions. And it's very detailed. I'm not going to spend time discussing all of it, but I do want to highlight a few areas because they really become instrumental in reviewing what's in front of us. One of the items that I think you're going to continue to see us reference are the planning principles. These are similar to guiding principles in other documents, but they are based on some of the priorities that Livability 22202 and the 3 civic associations in this area have developed even before this process started, and really are structured in a way that should help us as we go through this process to figure out if there are compromises and trade-offs or new technologies emerging, new information being made available now that we have more engineering information about this site, newer inventory of trees. How do these planning principles help us navigate through that path, figure out what is the right answer? How do we ultimately, in more ways than one, reach the ultimate vision for this site? So this is something we're going to keep coming back to, and I think is a helpful resource for everybody as we navigate this process. The sector plan itself is very dense. I do have some good news. We don't have to look at the entire document, but there is one section in particular that I think really could be helpful, and this is the development framework. These are the core components of what we have arrived at after that 18-month process of what should happen on each property. They're organized by topic, so we're not going to touch transportation tonight, but the other 3 will be discussed, particularly site and building form. Some of them are also supported in the appendix, so the pedestrian pathways, or as we're calling them, green ribbons, they do have a menu of cross sections, for example, at the end of the sector plan that allow us to consider different character treatments throughout that network. So it all works together, but I want to keep highlighting this because we're going to keep coming back to this specific section of the sector plan. The sector plan does have a lot of exhibits, and I also want to reinforce that not all of them are treated equally. Some were intentionally designed to really spur everyone's thinking, think outside the box, really benefit from a visionary approach to what could happen, and really help visualize how we could transform Pentagon City. It's very difficult to see that in narrative, even in sketches. So the illustrations you see on the left carry a very consistent disclaimer throughout the sector plan that they are just that, for illustrative purposes. The examples I'm showing on the right are more regulatory in nature to the degree that they can be in a sector plan document. And they do speak to very specific expectations for each property. Where should the buildings be? Where does the public space belong? What kind of uses should we expect? How much of the site should be set aside for vegetation? So this is something that we're going to keep coming back to, but as you see in our presentation and the instruments we're using to consider and review this proposal, it will be the 3 images you see on the right, primarily for tonight's meeting. So what do they actually say for River House? The exhibit that you see on the right really, I think, captures it best. It really talks about all 3 elements that we're going to discuss tonight: tree canopy, public spaces, and ultimately building locations. And that sequencing is very important because it follows what we did with the sector plan, where we started with where should the public spaces be located, make sure that there's an even distribution of those throughout the study area, but particularly River House. Then we thought about the green ribbon pathway. How do we have public access to and from these new destinations that we're creating, but at the same time, create similar pathways for existing destinations that are currently already there? How do folks, arrive into the property from Lynch Street and have a convenient way to get to Pentagon Row or West Post, the Metro? Or how do they get from the west heading into Virginia Highlands Park and vice versa. So a lot of this was supported by feedback we received during the process, and I think captures some of the main connection points we want to achieve here and make sure that anybody in the area, visitors or residents, can benefit from that. And after those two items are identified, that's when we get to what's left over for new buildings, the infill, particularly at River House, since we know the 3 existing buildings aren't going away. So this information sets the stage for where should those buildings be. And this is distinguished by the fixed and variable build-to zones. And not specific lines, they're zones intended to have flexibility. Some more specific, where I think we gave ourselves a little bit of wiggle room to move around in, but and some have a little bit more as far as 12 feet of wiggle room, where we think that flexibility may be more needed as we approach and design those public spaces. And this is important because as we consider the interpretation in front of us of this sector plan, we need to consider, are there more than one way to, I think, achieve this vision, given the constraints that the applicant is trying to solve for here. The pedestrian pathway, the term green ribbon, you're going to keep hearing that. That is essentially our way of establishing biophilic design throughout the property and really Pentagon City as a whole. This is something that ensures that pedestrians have convenience and visibility through the area, something that is branded properly, signed and lit, and ensures people feel welcome and can get to a lot of the different destinations, much more so than just serving the residents with specific properties. This is just one way in which a typical green ribbon could be designed. Again, in the appendix, the sector plan, we have a menu of choices, hoping that those building elements can be incorporated to create some diversity. Moving away from the publicly accessible spaces, we also have a lot of guidance on what happens on the remainder, the private portion of the property. And here's where both in River House and the rest of the study area, we have highlighted how much of the specific space could be set aside for the building and how much needs to be reserved for vegetation and tree canopy. And you can see here as we go in both exhibits, the standard is actually much higher for River House because we're starting at a much higher existing condition. The existing tree canopy that's there, the existing vegetation is really taken into account when compared to, I think, the very different conditions you see in that super block where you have the Simon property or Frid, where it's very heavy, rich environment, not too many trees. So that distinction, I think, is being mindfully introduced here. And this is something that I think the applicant was referencing in the presentation. Another way of displaying those existing conditions is to look back. This is kind of the latest data that we have available in GIS. It is dated 2016, and as the applicant is walking you through, and as our county staff are verifying, a much more thorough and current analysis is being undertaken to really inventory what's there, what isn't, what counts as tree canopy, and going a step further, evaluating how much of it needs to be replaced because of its health or nature, since we have a lot of invasives there. So, why are we looking at additional information that was not shown in July? Staff has, throughout this year, identified a number of areas that I think seem to be conflicting with the sector plan. So I just want to walk you through real quick what those are, and I think that will really help frame the conversation for tonight and moving forward. So looking at, I'm trying to compare both the sector plan, which is on the bottom, and the July submission that we had, and just to highlight where some of the origins of those comments are. I'm not going to read everything on the screen, but you can see here that some of the alignment of the green ribbon is not where the sector plan anticipated. It's not as publicly facing or visible. But most importantly, and I think maybe a theme of this presentation, is separation between buildings. Are we starting with an adequate spacing such that we can really achieve the primary green ribbon route that's shown towards the south of the property, somewhere in the middle actually, but also towards the north across from Pentagon Road? Is that space still continuing to has the potential to become a destination space? Now, one of the things that's not shown in this graphic, if you look at just the sector plan, is that we did add a note that spoke to the variation of building heights. Some of these things are shown in a way that they are because we're expecting much taller building heights. As that does not happen and the building heights are depressed, we are mindful of how does that start to push and pull some of the building edges that we were envisioning. And I think there's multiple ways of interpreting that. We want to make sure that the public spaces and the green ribbon character and location and alignment not being sacrificed by that depression of building heights. And I think there's a way to achieve both. And I think as we go through this process, we're going to get to that point, given the progress that's been made over the summer. Building locations, again, highlighted here. I think two buildings in particular is where I think we're focusing our efforts on, the C3 building, note number 1, and the N2 building, note number 2. I think the one on the far right is already proposed to be removed. I think it might just make sense to bring that whole area into the northern land bay for ease of legibility and further conversation. But again, the sector plan envisioned a certain build-to zone of 12 feet in many cases. Some of these buildings are well exceeding that. As we consider that, are we still getting the public spaces that we were envisioning in the sector plan? So that's going to be, I think, the focus of the conversation. Some other ways of looking at that, I was trying to utilize ways to better display that. That one instance we're focusing between C2 and C3, just to show you on the left, the sector plan image of where the build-to lines were, and then the proposal that's in front of us that reduces that width between buildings C2 and C3. C3, I think, is currently being studied to chamfer that corner closest to the bottom of the screen, which I think will mirror what the C2 building is doing further away towards Virginia Highlands Park, which I think will help with the visibility and the line of sight we're trying to preserve, but it's significantly more narrow than the sector plan envisioned. So that's something we just need to consider. And additionally, similar constraint is being shown between N1 and N2, where the sector plan was envisioning initially a very similar separation as we have currently with Pentagon Row. But again, that was anticipated much taller building heights. So if no longer having that density there, what is the right width there? How do we still achieve the destination space the sector plan envisioned? Then finally, tree canopy. I think this one is much closer to being resolved, given some of the latest changes that are proposed. We are still monitoring what happens on the western property line and the tree canopy buffer that was anticipated there. And I think building number 2, or note number 2, just simply speaks to the future need for flexibility as the Virginia Highlands Park process is going to consider what happens. The updates, I'm going to fly through these since we did not go first. So you already heard what the applicant is considering. These are just some before and afters. Again, realignment of the green ribbon, the increased tree canopy, and some additional movement in the building locations, which I think is getting us to the right place in terms of consistency with the sector plan. We saw a little bit of that on the northern end of the site, but I think the separation between N1 and N2 is still a challenge that we need to keep talking through and figuring out what's possible there. The last thing I'll mention is just a plug for the next meeting, which is October 24th. Again, I think that might have an opportunity for some follow-up. Tonight's conversation, particularly focusing on transportation, parking, and fire access. And again, myself, Adam Watson, who's the lead planner, and you can see both Jim and Daniel's contact information. Daniel Weir is going to be chairing the SPRC portion of the process. So multiple ways of reaching us. There's a project page where we're tracking a lot of the different documentation, materials, comments. So please reach out even after the meeting if something comes to mind and you want us to consider it further. And that's it for me.
Okay, thank you. It's now with the committee. We have 3 topics that we'll be exploring tonight. As Matt mentioned, we will not be talking about transportation at this one, but we will be talking about tree canopy. We'll be talking about massing building location, and we'll be talking about public realm. I think I might want to first touch on tree canopy because there has been a lot of movement there. I throw that out for discussion.
Okay, question.
Well, go ahead.
The 40-foot buffer you think, Matt, is actually being adequately met on the southern end. What about the 60-foot on the western side? There were no comments about that.
So most of the western edge is being met. I think it's really when we get down to where the existing tennis courts are. And I think there's already an existing break in the tree canopy, which I think opens the door to how much of it should need to be preserved. And I think we're also getting into how much tree canopy do we actually have there, since I think there's a mixture of vegetation. Right. So I think that's where we haven't quite reached the conclusion of how much of that strip still needs to deliver that, and then therefore where the work could go to.
Yeah, well, when do you think you're going to reach a conclusion on your study of the inventory?
I'm going to turn to the applicant.
We already have completed it for, that was, again, one of the first things we did was evaluate that. And that's where we were also discovering that, for example, in that southwest corner, bamboo, a lot of invasive species. And so that's why we adopted a forest management approach as opposed to a preservation, because we really don't want to preserve the existing invasive species. And a lot of the invasive species are in fact engulfing, the viable trees. And so the first step is to eliminate that. And some things we can't know until that's been done because it's so covered. Perhaps in the wintertime we can see more, but for the porcelain berry, for example, is really covering so much of the existing material that it's hard to see in some cases what's even there.
Okay. So sometime in the winter.
I think we'll get we already have evaluated, as I said, and identified the existing native and in fact invasive trees species, but we can refine that in the wintertime once we can see more.
I have a clarifying question. For the southwest corner, is the 60-foot buffer along the western edge of the property, that's 60 feet within the footprint of this particular property? It does not include anything outside that?
Correct. It's wholly within the River House property. And the wording, to be particular, since, again, at the time of the sector plan, we did not have this level of analysis. It does say generally. All right, so the analysis that we're going to have could lead us to a small number. But I think it will be based on that analysis, inventory, and feedback from our county staff that can verify that.
Because the reason I'm raising it is the northern part of the northwestern part is the property line goes right up to Lynn Street, I believe. The southern part backs up on county property, which is already essentially green space. It's not built upon. There's not a street there. There's not buildings there. I think we mentioned it's county right of way, but it is not an active right of way. It's just power lines. It's not there. Is there any thought about how that will be dealt with? Because if we're dealing with the invasives on one side of this line and the other side, they just come right back in. It's just not going to be very good. So I'm throwing that out there. I doubt there'll be a resolution tonight, but I'm throwing that out as something that I think we should address further on.
Can I just jump in? And I hate to be pedantic on semantics, but I think it's important because we're talking about the plan and what the plan says and basing our recommendations and discussion on that. There are a couple of references to a buffer, there being a buffer here. There's nothing in the plan about a buffer, right? The plan says that we will preserve the existing tree canopy in that area. So I think it's important to note that, as Sharon mentioned, we are studying that tree canopy, we're preserving that tree canopy. We're not creating essentially a no-build, no-touch zone where there is no tree canopy. Right, we're doing what the plan says with respect to preservation. So again, I don't mean to be pedantic, but I
acknowledge the buffer is not a word used in that. So I understand that and I agree. I do not dispute that at all. So any other questions, comments on tree canopy? Yes.
Yeah. Kudos to the applicant for taking some steps to preserve the buffers on both sides. But my observation of trees in the other area is that it's somewhat diffuse. You've got some street trees here, some street trees there, but there's nothing to sort of match the rich forested areas and along the borders.
Can we show the full canopy? And we were moving fast, so you probably missed it, but there was one slide where we showed not only the enhanced tree canopy at the western and southern edges, right, but then a subsequent slide showed the infill in between.
Well, that's actually the part I was getting at. It seemed to me that yes, there were street trees and additions to the tree canopy in a technical sense, but there's nothing to really kind of lead to the kind of rich forestation that you've already got on the southern and western end. It's just, the sort of typical street trees and whatnot.
It's actually so breached out on this image, but it's continuous forest land, and we're spacing it we can't space them closer, obviously, because that's not healthy for the trees.
Right.
But we have standard best practice spacing that we have maximized on we were focused on the western and southern edges first. And then we met and exceeded the rest of the requirement within to create a more parkland biophilic experience within the site.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's what I was getting at is the renderings did not scream parkland or biophilic environment. They just seemed like sort of standard street trees. Maybe that's just a function of the renderings, but.
This really is washed out. I don't think it shows this little.
Are they in the printout that you have?
Good idea.
The other balance we were trying to strike, we were trying to meet and exceed the canopy coverage requirement, which we have, but we also wanted to provide enough open space for moving about and, for destination spaces where activity can happen.
But I do think it's a great comment, and obviously, right, one where when we get into the public park master plan, there's definitely a question for a lot of the spaces that migrate from that really canopy-rich edges to obviously, by the time you get to Joy Street, that's going to start to be more of the hardscape. And I think that where that transition happens is a really good one, and I think we drilled in a little bit on the northern open space in between N1 and N2. But I think that question repeats itself throughout the site, right? Where do we move from really dense canopy to starting to get to, right? I mean, Joy Street is a very active street and will need to, I assume at some point, transition to more hardscape. But yeah.
I mean, obviously, I'd be interested in seeing any detail as you develop that.
Yeah.
Definitely, and as we refine the design, we're going to add it wherever we can, but we don't have the availability of we don't know where those can be right now.
Right.
I have another clarifying question. When Joy Street gets realigned and Grasshopper Park and Virginia Islands Park get reconfigured because of that, part of that is, of course, within the boundaries of the property here. How is that being accounted for on this as far as tree cover, vegetation, that sort of thing?
That's one of the things I covered that we ran the calculation if we couldn't count any of that in
That's
our.
what I thought. I just want to make sure.
Right, and we are still above 20%.
Okay, great. Because that will be a big chunk of green space within this particular area.
Right.
Okay, good. That's good.
So is there a maintenance plan in place for, pruning some of the existing trees, particularly on the green ribbons? I asked this because I was on a bike trail this morning, getting whacked by all kinds of branches. So I know that it's something that you have to consider in the long term, maintaining those. And I know there are a lot of different firms involved. So I'm trying to feel out who sort of has the.
Yeah, I can take that. I mean, typically it's going to depend on who owns the ultimate space. So if it's a space that we actually deed over and fee to the county, typically that ongoing maintenance obligation falls on them. If it's one where we grant a public easement over that space, so if it's, for example, we have a structured garage underneath that open space, or there's some other reason why the county doesn't want to take it. I've seen it both ways, but I think typically the property owner, it winds up being basically an obligation of that building. It's baked into the site plan conditions, and it's baked into the easement language, so it runs with the property. It's not really the obligation of any individual company. It winds up running with that property as an ongoing obligation. And it'll typically there'll be some standards in there. I mean, we just did one for Amazon for Met Park. They took on that obligation, and that runs with those buildings where they're required to maintain that to a certain standard.
Gotcha. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on tree canopy? Why don't we now move on to building location and massing? And does anybody have questions or comments about that?
I do.
Sure. I have one clarifying question. There's a reference to the building in the northeast corner being eliminated. Is that gone just from this conversation, or is that density evaporating?
If we remove it, that density is probably gone. We will look for opportunities, obviously, elsewhere on site to make that up. But that's one where I think staff highlighted that as there's a pretty strong conflict with how they're reading the sector plan. So yeah, we're looking at eliminating that, and that would most likely be a net reduction in that density. We have not yet found a way to other places on the site to make up that 13-story tower. So.
Do you mind actually if I go back on a canopy?
Sure.
So I just wanted to clarify, I like the idea of adding that buffer, that 40 foot at the southern end, but so I'm confused. I know we were just talking about whether that then the 60 foot on the west is included in the property or if it's part of the county property. I didn't understand, I didn't get.
So the sector plan requires us to basically do a tree canopy survey.
Okay.
Within that 40-foot zone and within that 60-foot zone.
Yep.
And within the 40-foot zone, as you know, there's mostly asphalt, right, today. There's the 10-foot parking, there's a 10-foot planting strip along the eastern edge. On the other edge, our parking lot goes sort of right up to those fences. Staff is saying, but the plan would still be better served, be more in the spirit, I think, right? Not to put words in your mouth, but I think you'd say this would be improved if you, in addition to preserving the existing canopy that's there, which within the 40-foot zone, there's not a lot.
Yeah.
If in addition to preserving what's there, you were to expand that canopy. And so that's really what's happened along the southern lot line. Along the western lot line, similar but different conditions. We're really into the hill there. There's the tennis court, which obviously there's no trees on that. Tennis court is mostly surrounded by bamboo. And then we've angled the buildings to the building footprints to preserve the most the existing native trees that are there. And so we're preserving all the canopy that is within that 60-foot zone. And actually, there's a net increase after we plant the new trees within that 60-foot zone. But our buildings are not set back 60 feet from the property line, but we are maintaining and on net actually increasing the canopy in that zone. Is that a fair characterization?
And I guess the follow-up would be then if that complied with the sector plan that's written.
I think we're going to be relying on everybody's interpretation of the intent.
Yeah.
Planning principles, and really I think the underlying reason why we have the tree cover, tree canopy in both areas, and a lot of it I think is to go a step further than what the sector plan already had in its place. We intentionally depressed the heights as we got further south from River House. Approaching the single family homes, how do we gradually and comfortably transition buildings to a much higher height further into the property, further north? And I think that helped a little bit. Separating how close the buildings can come to the lot line also helped a little bit. But I think relying on tree canopy, a lot of residents nearby told us that's a great way to kind of soften and establish a relationship between much greater density of development. So I think to the degree that we can, while still I think testing what's feasible, right? Because I think that's not just the only consideration, but where's that balance? Where's the right mix of tree canopy and still having a viable footprint, particularly since the applicant has gone out of their way to produce something much lesser in terms of density and impact. And I think housing typologies are really something we should pursue, since there's not too many sites like this one in the county.
So perhaps since there is that county property on that side, it might be worth considering, and with full of invasives, that maybe that would be part of it. You keep the building there, but maybe there's some improvement to that one.
Well, and the other thing, Carrie, there's the area that the residents of that condo call the jungle.
Oh, I've been through there.
The jungle. So that's an area where that's directly in their view shed, and we actually found that area less conducive to some of our building footprints. So that's an area where we actually the buildings are set back much further than 60, and there's sort of going to be a more dense grove there. So I think that's an area where there's some areas where we're closer and some areas where we're further back, and that's one where I think we found a good sort of win-win opportunity where it was more conducive to added trees and less conducive to, our building functions.
Sure. Mr. Solly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks everyone for the presentations and all the work. This is fairly impressive. And I'll try to keep in mind that we're LRPC, not SPRC. It's always a little tricky line to thread. Nonetheless, I think a little bit with building footprint and open space, I think those two obviously are kind of tied together. So my first question is, I guess for clarifying question, the example of the King Street, I think it was, what is the height of the buildings on that particular example?
I don't know. I mean, that's right in Old Town, so they're probably shorter.
Yeah, they're like
4.
2, 3, 4 stories at the most.
I can jump into Google Earth.
No, it's okay. I just need a rough. So I'm just trying to understand that comparison relative to this one, whereas here we're talking about 8 stories or so, right? So the feeling would be a little different than the example. And I think.
Actually, well, actually, it's not 8 because I think
It's
up on the
you're
first.
6 at that point because you're already kind of halfway up the hill. But it's a great point and one that we're thinking about and have talked about. And Matt even said it, the distance between relative to the height. In our mind, it has everything to do with the section and kind of a rule of thumb, urban design rule of thumb, would be a 1-to-1 width to height. So this 65 feet, 6 stories above the green ribbon open space is largely driven by that section, the 65 in plan. So King Street Eatery would be the same kind of thing, 4 stories to 40 or 50 feet.
And just to be clear, I'm not playing gotcha. I just really am trying to understand, this example, the sort of scale. And
Yeah, they're shorter.
Sort of,
I'm pulled up on Google Earth. Yeah, they're 3
to
stories.
bring that sort of level of scale and feel to that.
That's a good point.
And the next question is on the sort of overall campus massing, if I can use that term. It seems like there's a lot of height that's being left on the table. Is that a safe thing to say? I'm wondering if we can sort of perhaps step back and take a look at this as sort of like almost like a skyline. And I feel like there's a little bit of a missed opportunity there, particularly between the north, so like let's say end 1 to create a little bit of a contrast and perhaps even a lookout, that you can see over the other buildings to alleviate a little bit of this ground plane sector plan conflict that we're having and capitalize, frankly, on, some views. And then just thinking like as the whole campus and as the skyline approach, I think, first of all, I think it's really elegant the way the townhouses transition to the like sort of lower building. And then there's a historic building. And someone mentioned affinity towards the existing towers, which again, that might be more of an SPRC comment, but I highly encourage and applaud that. I think having this notion of these buildings being of a family, cousins and whatnot, but have that sort of affinity is really, really helpful. But where was I? Oh, right. The townhouses and then the 3 to 4 stories and then that sort of historic tower. And then I think, it steps back down again and then it goes back up again to the Potomac. And then between the Potomac and the James, I feel like it almost wants to go high. It wants to be the peak, right? If I may use the term. I'm pontificating a little bit and I apologize for that. But I think since this is LRPC, I think this is better than during the SRC when it's kind of a little too late. So I would just encourage the team to take a look at that a little bit. And then that perhaps would allow us to have a little bit more space between the 2 buildings, And I know that there's building cost constructions, although I don't think there's any wood framing on the north towers in particular, right? We are talking about
they're wood buildings.
They are wood buildings?
Well, I'd say they're mid-rise at this point. We honestly haven't got into construction typology.
Because that has a 5-story max, blah, blah, blah. So if we're talking about that, it becomes a little bit more sort of a different agenda. But if that's still optional, right, I would sort of encourage a little bit more height. And I think that would start to open up these sight lines, which I think are important. And I think, that really helps also on things like orientation and people getting around the site, intuitively, right? Whenever we're doing transportation plans, people are always talking about signage, which of course you have to have signage, but a really good design, right, is is so intuitive that the sign is just reinforcing the direction that you're already walking in, or, you know, where you want to achieve. So I'll get off my soapbox. Make sure I think I covered everything that I had, but that's it. I think I feel like there's a little bit of height that we ought to capture on this project is my big takeaway point.
I think related to that, just for everybody's benefit, the reason why I think staff is repeating and highlighting the separation issue, particularly between M1 and 2 and then the C2 and C3 buildings, is because throughout the process and where we ended up with the sector plan, those were destination, really special areas. And what we're seeing, I think, is the separation between those two is no different than we're seeing anywhere else on the property. The building separation that you would have otherwise, I think, mirrors in those, what we would hope to have seen, special, you know, spaces, which the design team, I think, is doing an incredible job with designing what's there, what's presented there. But I think we have to ask ourselves a fundamental question of, do we have to be there? Is this the limitation we need to put on the design team to then do the best they can? Or is there some further room for movement between the separation of those two buildings, given how special those areas wanted to be in a sector plan? So,
First,
Yeah, well, I'll much shorter. I think Commissioner Sarli's comments, but
Sorry.
No, I love the comments. I don't have the vocabulary to articulate myself in that way. But I like to associate myself with that because the first thought I had when I saw, you know, the renderings here is that there's a lot of height left on the table. And if we're running into an issue where these buildings might just be too close together, then why not space them out a little bit more and add more density on top? That to me makes a lot of intuitive sense, but that's my quick little association comment.
I'm sure the design team will talk a little more about the kind of specifics of how we put this together, but I just want to mention as we go into talking about these, and particularly about the end buildings, a couple of points from the sector plan. I think something to keep in mind as we look at all of this is that, you know, the drawings we see from the sector plan are not dimensioned, right? There's a gross kind of this much area of open space total, but there are no measurements between the buildings, right? This is a massive site. This is 36 acres. And what we perceive as kind of a space that may be narrow on this kind of a drawing, on a 36-acre drawing is much wider than you may think. I think that's number one. Number two, to address both the comments about the height and about the building separation, on the regulatory plan, right, on page 109, this area is called out specifically, and I'll just read it. It says, as depicted on this map, tower separation reflects maximum building heights permitted in this plan and may decrease if proposed site plan represents significantly lower building heights. This area was specifically called out as one that can be narrowed if the buildings are lower, and that's exactly what we're doing. So as we're evaluating this, obviously it has to be a great design, it has to be a great place, but I think we need to make sure that we're looking at the language of the sector plan and determining whether that's all been met.
Okay, thank you. Well, my comment, I want to join myself with both my fellow commissioners on this. I would like us to look at that way because I had the same reaction as Commissioner Sarli when I first looked at the illustrations that these are lower buildings than what's being proposed here. And, you know, the decision made not to take advantage of the full density there, that's a business decision that I'm not going to second guess, though I would love to see more, having been involved in the whole Pentagon City plan. But it's still going to be roughly 7 stories high on both sides, and that can do a canyon effect. And there is a best practice for width when you start getting tall. And I'm not sure that the width here really is right for this. If there's a way we can push them further apart. With the chamfering on the C buildings, I could live with a pinch point as long as it's widening on both. That actually could make an interesting passageway. But with the two end buildings, it'll feel like a canyon. And I think we were trying to avoid that when we were originally planning things. And yes, things go down, you can narrow it, I get that. That's the way the design works. But I'm still concerned that it's a little too narrow for what we want here. I also noted that at the end between the two end buildings, the green ribbon goes straight up, that none of the renderings or none of the plans acknowledge that there is the stairway that goes up to Lynn Street at the end there. Was that just an oversight, or are you planning to eliminate the stairway?
At the Land Bay End.
Right.
It's very steep there.
Right.
And so to get ADA compliant access would just be a bank of
I
switchbacks
figured
there.
that, but it doesn't mean the stairway has to be removed.
Right. In the location where they would be, we would have to remove trees to do that. We could explore adding stairs there.
No, we don't have to add stairs. There are stairs there right now.
You're talking about the southern?
Off Lynn Street,
That go into the bus
coming
street.
downhill,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
there is a stairway right now that is maintained by somebody.
Further, that's further south.
And there's
You're
a
talking further south.
there's a crosswalk that the county has painted on Lynn Street, going from the condo building across Lynn to that stairway, which then goes down into the River House property.
Right, I know exactly what you're talking about now. And actually, several of the residents that we talked to call them the stairs of death.
Yeah,
They're
because they're, I know,
very,
they're
very
steep.
steep.
They are used, but they're neat.
But what we have there, right in that location, is an access, an ADA compliant access. It isn't part of the green ribbon. It departs from the green ribbon, goes up almost in the same place, and actually connects the bus stop.
That's
So-
not, but it's not in the renderings or the plans.
It's in
Can
the
you
green
show the-
ribbon diagram.
Yeah, can we pull that
I'll
up?
pull that up.
Can you
There
look at it? 'Cause
is a way
I
to
missed
get to
that.
Lynn Street.
Yeah.
But not at the exact location of the existing stairs.
We felt it was important to connect the bus stop in an ADA compliant route, which doesn't exist currently.
Right, I agree.
So that you can see, I'll point it out. Right here.
Okay, no, well, that's already there. I'm talking about down in the corner.
This is the one you're talking
Is.
about, Jim.
That's where the stairway is,
Yeah, and so I think we,
right there.
yeah,
So we're about 50 feet south of that in the connection up to Lynn Street.
we
Right.
proposed consolidating them, right, with the ADA accessible route. I don't know that there'd be we could sort of look at it, at sort of adding a stair back in that location. But
We can, again, we were focused on an
Yeah,
ADA
just
compliant
let's
route
take a
that
look
was
at that.
nearby.
And I think Arlington Ridge, you'll
Yeah.
really want to look at that and
Yeah,
get
I mean, everyone uses.
the condos up there, because I'm presuming it's used, given that it's maintained, and there is that, county's put the crosswalk there and even the dip, nobody's ever, God, I hope somebody who's disabled isn't using that stairway, but, it is acknowledged that that's a desirable.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I think this is obviously getting pretty far into the details, but I think when we talked about this, it's been a while, Sharon, since we did this. I think we were thinking about consolidating with the bus stop so we were and then it may potentially even relocating the crosswalk there, because I think people are generally coming from the south to that crosswalk rather than coming from the north up Lynn Street to the crosswalk. So, but that's something
Well, you're
obviously,
saying,
right, we can,
Army Navy to the crosswalk. Yeah, you would be coming down.
you're coming down, yeah. So our thought was we would kind of move that closer and consolidate with the bus stop, knowing that's the point we needed to serve. So, but yeah.
I'm throwing that, we don't have to, again, won't be resolved here.
Yeah.
For the next meeting, because that'll also be a transportation issue too.
Sure.
It's one of those dual issues. And
Yeah, we can
I'd
show that in
ask
more
Arlington
detail.
Ridge to sort of look into that, so we can get further feedback.
Yeah.
So, anyway, those are my comments on that.
If I could just go back to the N1, N2, not to beat a dead horse. The language, as Kedrick mentioned, it does specify that we are open to shifting that, right? As buildings heights go down, that can shift. I don't know if the intent was to reduce it by half or more than half, right? So I think the deliberation we need to have, are there opportunities to still expand that? And I think some of the initial ideas that at least staff was considering in reviewing this is heights may be very difficult, right? Building topologies are what they are. Are there opportunities where the N2 building perhaps could have a single loaded corridor facing that, right, that space and still keep at the heights that it is? Could that be something that could be explored further, such that you don't necessarily have to entertain a brand new construction methodology, but at the risk of losing units, of course, I'm not being naive here, right? We could get some expansion, even if it's not needing the Pentagon Row expansion across the street. So things like that, I think I would be really interested to see if those are feasible, what are the challenges that they create.
Following up on that, I don't know if it pencils out, but you could go higher if you did the first 2 levels concrete and then stick above that. Because I've seen that in other areas around here where first few stories are concrete and then it's stick above those to get extra height. Because we've seen 9, 10-story buildings that were stick on top and then a couple of levels or 2 or 3 levels of concrete at the bottom. Again, I don't know if it pencils out for you, but that's another possibility to get a little extra height here, which is totally within the contemplation of the plan and continue to allow a wider green ribbon. Anyway, yeah, I'll drop. Does anybody have any further comments on building massing?
So as the president of, the Civic Association representing River House as well as all the condos, obviously, I know there, as you all are aware, some of the condos are concerned about the heights. So I will say that. I also will say that, the River House residents as well as other residents who use the area do appreciate, green space. And so in looking at kind of the sector plan, it does seem like this area is significantly smaller than envisioned. I know we had talked about it, Matt, in the community meeting about, well, it is wide, and I think the renderings show that, but I think you missed the opportunity to have more open green space when you have, when you reduce it as much as you do. And so that, I think, whether you're removing the middle sections or what you're doing, I do agree with the comment.
Can I make a quick question?
First, your turn, and then
Yeah, I'm Jeff Williams. I'm a 30-year resident of River House. And I'll say I've been reviewing the submissions and plans for the last week or so, and the width of that identified public space between N1 and N2 is something I've become more and more uncomfortable with. I feel it's too narrow. The buildings look like they're about 77 feet high. It's 276 feet long. And that space reads to me as a space you move through. And it seems like it's a real missed opportunity to be able to mirror the space at Pentagon Row and create kind of quieter public space on this side. Seems like that would be a great thing. I walked around the top of the walk and the view down towards Pentagon Row. In the winter, you've got the ice rink and the holiday lights up. And you've got this narrow corridor that you don't even see it. And I think a prospect view at the top of that. And I just think it's a real missed opportunity for a great public space. And I would be okay with going higher, but I do know that the views are an issue with some of the neighbors that are higher on the ridge. I would like you to be able to recover that density by going up. Because I feel like you had to push the buildings down and they spread out, and what we got was what was left over. I don't think you started with the park and put the buildings up. I think you started with the buildings, and then what was left is what we got. So that's just my observation.
Okay.
So that was my question. You mentioned that some of the neighbors are concerned with the height, so they're concerned that it's too tall
Yeah,
right
I
now
think-
because of blocking sight lines.
I think there was significant concern of some of the folks on the ridge, right, in the condos with the massing presented in the sector plan. So I think the heights in the proposal by J.B. Smith, they felt more comfortable with. But again, I am doing my best to represent all the people, right, in our neighborhood with conflicting, diverse viewpoints.
Mm-hmm.
And while we have people who don't like the heights, we have others who, to them, it is no consequence, and they might want more workspace. So
And I think it's a pretty wide range in terms of the ceiling the sector plan establishes. Without having a minimum, but I think it's 250 feet where M1 and 2 are located. I think right now it's proposed M1 and 2 are, somebody got the number, 77?
77 is what I saw in the elevation from the base to the top.
So
It's 65 from that level where the public space is. It's probably taller than 77 on the Joyce Street frontage.
Okay.
Because again, we're building into a hill that goes up 26 feet and goes up another 30 feet to Lynn.
Okay. Do we have any further comments on building massing and location? Okay, we can move on to parks, public realm. I think we have really been talking about both because they're so totally related here. But anybody have any? Yeah.
I guess I have a question on, and this is a detailing, and forgive me if this is on the presentation.
But when the green ribbon and a road or a street are doing double duty, I guess that becomes design dependent to sort of highlight or define the green ribbon versus the road. I guess I'm a little nervous that putting a street trees along a sidewalk, a green ribbon does not make, right? So that's a little bit of my sort of concern or question or comment. Do we have, and I'm looking at some of the sections, but so like, let me put it in a question format. Please explain to me how the street and the green ribbon work together when they're occupying the same space.
We are just studying this now because this is a recent move to put it on Kent Street. But one of the things that we talked to staff about was, and working with hybrid to, again, move the building massing to accommodate it, was to make sure we're in compliance with the full 16-foot width of the green ribbon corridor. So that includes a minimum of 8-foot throughway on the green ribbon of paving, and then the remaining 8 feet is planted. So there would be at least that along Kent.
And then I guess to follow up, when it's between the buildings, does it have the same sort of definition? How do you differentiate between like the green ribbon and let's say like the public space, or are we just making that absolutely green ribbon?
It's actually exceeding the green ribbon requirements because we're doing a larger planted area. For example, between the land-based C buildings, we have a couple of sections. I'm not sure, not in this deck, but showing that we have the 12 to 15 foot throughway through the between the C2 and C3 buildings, and a separate 6-foot pedestrian separate weaving its way around it, and then 15 to 20 feet of planting weaving its way around on both sides of that. So it's exceeding the green ribbon corridor requirements and providing this larger sense of park space between the buildings.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Van.
Hi, I was going to raise the same questions as Sally did, so I'm glad that he started the conversation. Multiple questions, because I really don't understand it. Why are you asking the proposal to be moved to Kent Street? And what does it actually mean, as Sally was asking, when you try to put a green ribbon on a street? The street already has cars and bikes and sidewalks and street trees. So how do you combine them, and why would you combine them?
I can start. So I think what we reacted to when the first proposal came in, which is called the July version, is that as we enter the property from the south, there was an immediate turn for the green ribbon to then align it through in between the townhomes, right? So until you got to the C2, C3 part of the property, we thought they were fairly hidden. And it was really a repurposing of space that was already going to be designed well to serve the residents of those apartments, but also come at a risk of not being as visible. So the green ribbon pathway, one of its key objectives is to make sure that even if you don't live here, you're just passing by, or if you're just using this for a shortcut or to get to a destination, you don't need signage, you don't need a GPS. It's very clear. This is publicly welcoming. This will get you to other connections or other destinations. It's safe, and you're not intruding on anybody's privacy. And I think when they are aligned to go through the middle and or back, however you want to see it, those townhomes, that doesn't meet that criteria. It's just plain and simple. It could still be designed really well, but it's not the intent of the green ribbon.
And we put a
I don't understand, how
on
is
the
it
street.
then a green ribbon if it's on the street?
Yeah, actually, it will be. There's another spot in the
But you're in a
plan.
sidewalk.
There, the green ribbon will actually be on the street by the mall. There's a section of it that will be right along the street where it comes out of the old TSA site, crosses the street, and then it goes along the mall there before then goes wherever else it goes. But we do have another situation like that. In fact, it's one of the busiest streets in the area. So that's why, as Matt explained, it makes more sense to me to have it along the new Kent Street extension. I agree it's not ideal, but it's the better location than having it literally detour in through the townhouses and then back out. No one walking from Aurora Highlands is going to use that to get anywhere. They're going to stay right on Kent Street regardless. This Kent Street will be there no matter what.
I was going to say, when I looked at the initial plan, when it hit Kent Street, I said, oh, well, I'm just going to get on the road. And you know, as a walker, you're going to say, that's the way to go.
That's the way to go.
I'm just going to go.
That's the desire line.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, Pam, that's the reason. That's what's going on for it. Chris, before you, Chris Slatt has his hand raised. It's your turn, Mr. Slatt.
Thanks. I wanted to jump in on this also because I think I understand staff's concerns about visibility, but I'm not convinced that moving this green ribbon onto Kent Street isn't a cure that's worse than the symptoms in the first place. I really think there's a potential alignment where the green ribbon, you know, comes down and starts at the starts at Kent, so that there's a very visible entrance. I agree the current like entrance from the south side is very difficult to see in the July proposal. But I feel like my take was always that the green ribbon was intended as a different experience that than walking on a sidewalk. That the goal here was to give people other ways to get around than just walking on the sidewalk. And I think that notion of a kind of back of house in amongst people's, you know, yards or stoops or all of that is a valuable different pedestrian experience that would be that's worth trying to save here. And I think if it did, you know, connect to Kent on that, I guess it's the southern end, but then go and have this sort of different, farther from cars experience, it could still be a very useful and valuable opportunity. I think I don't love that we've thrown away this alignment before we ever had an LRPC meeting about it, because I think there's a lot of value to that, you know, off the beaten path, but still a public and, you know, vetted, allowed place for people to be experience. So I think I appreciate that other commissioners are raising the question, and I want to just go out and say I think there's a lot of value in trying to keep this green ribbon off of Kent Street while making it easier to find. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Slatt. Your turn now.
Yes, thanks. The other thing I think we need to keep in mind is it's not only the pedestrians and the cyclists who are on the green ribbon, we're also trying to create a path for wildlife. And so we want the birds and the pollinators. And if we move it onto the street, which we have to do in some places, we're going to have to cross Hayes, we're going to have to cross Joyce. But I think if we can minimize the number of places where the wildlife is interrupted, I think that will maintain the desired effect of the green ribbon. Thanks.
I think it's a good point. Other comments on public realm? That has to be people at the table.
So like people that are outside that for afterwards.
If you want to make comments afterwards, sign up.
I got you signed up. So there'll be public comment towards the end.
Great.
I don't know if you can kick me to a future meeting to bring this up, but I was a little confused about with the green ribbon, some of those cutbacks. And I don't know, maybe you can bring back up the slides. It seemed to me like with the rerouting to open up that visibility, I was confused how compliant, you'd mentioned something about it wouldn't be ADA compliant. Can you speak a little more to that? I'm concerned about, we do have people of differing mobilities, right, traversing these areas. And even if I look at the area between the end buildings, it looked like there were cutbacks. I just would like to learn a little bit more about that.
That's an excellent point. And it was, again, really, really important to us too. And so the point I was trying to make, and actually the next slide might illustrate it more, but the most direct line, which is, you know, the sort of sector plan language, a direct line to the 15th Street spur exceeds 12 and 13% on average, and it's far greater than that in some areas. And 8.3 is the maximum allowable ramp slope. So our view of the most direct route is this path that weaves more gently through the hillside there. And that one is the first one we came up with because it's the most gentle ascent. And that is all less than 5%, which means they're not even ramps. These are just sloped walkways, completely ADA compliant and universally accessible. So that is what we're trying to achieve here. And we're also weaving it between the trees. You know, we're parallel to the contours as much as we can be. That lessens the slope, and we're avoiding the existing trees. So we're putting people in the forest and getting them up the hill in this experience. So it's not just a pathway, it's an experience going through the forested area. And it's something that everybody can experience. You know, nobody has a barrier to this. So that is our response to, you know, sometimes the most direct route is the gentlest route.
I guess I would be interested in understanding if you could maintain everything you just described, because I think that's fantastic and somehow adding more visibility.
That's what we would like to achieve, and that's what we're studying. That's why we're still pushing and pulling all the buildings and the trees and the topography, and so we're doing extensive studies on that.
Commissioner Sarli?
I just want to do a quick plug-in. I'm almost presenting or joining the presenting team here. The good thing about the super gentle slope that I really want to highlight is there aren't guardrails, there aren't curbs, there aren't, you know, all these sort of restrictions that would be in place if it was anymore. So as far as sort of being in the realm of the green ribbon, the gentlest is indeed the best.
Can you answer then also on the end buildings? I saw there were some cutbacks there too.
Right, there's I think Murphy mentioned a 26, 28 foot elevation change, just very abrupt. And so we have to traverse that. So what we're showing, we're trying to make that an element too. So we're trying to create this artistic feature, sort of like almost San Francisco, where these ramp walls could be mosaics in the front. We had some, I think one of our initial submissions in the summertime showed how that could be an art piece. And so that again is an ADA compliant route from Joyce up to the public space between N1 and N2, but flanked by stairs. So you have options, because we know that some people with some abilities actually have greater ease with stairs than ramps.
So the only thing would bikes be able to get up, I'm assuming that.
Yes, yes.
Run over the water something.
Right, it could be the rail or just wheeling it. The turning radii are sufficient. And again, we wanted to insert planting between each of the switchbacks so it doesn't feel like a sea of concrete switchbacks. It lays back quite gently, actually, across the land. And so you're going through gardens as you weave your way up.
Because the design of those is always so important, because otherwise, since it's up there, people don't think they can go up. They don't know what's up there. If it's done right, it becomes inviting and so I want to see what's up there rather than there's nothing up there. You know, why should I go there? So,
exactly.
All of these things will be SBRC topics, including the other area. And they'll no doubt have a lot of discussion on that, because that's where design really, really matters on all of those. Once you have the basic concept in place.
Yes.
Thank you. We did have this section.
Yeah, so you can see in the top one on the left side, it really does lay back more than you would think. We're able to draw that back and again make it an experience. We think some people might choose the ramps just because it weaves, and again it can be this immersive biophilic experience. We can theme that garden as a pollinator, so the monarch butterflies, the hummingbirds are coming, and that ephemeral aspect becomes part of the experience as you're moving through the space. What we thought about as we're moving toward the SBRC process, public art, that part of it also is this rotating art piece or these seasonal changes, light exhibits and things like that. There could be a lot of things that draw you up that slope.
Commissioner Slatt.
Yes.
You're on mute.
I think he also may have left his hand up.
Oh, is it just the residual hand up?
Yeah,
Okay.
Couldn't tell.
Never mind. Okay, any other,
Just to shift gears very quickly. I'm not sure whether this was actually public space or not, but on the This is the northern corner next to Army Navy Drive. You're now building a tower where originally we were talking about open space.
We're not. Yeah, we had proposed.
Right.
Putting an additional, sort of long-term future, not our a site plan application, but our overall PDSB, the ability, and actually we originally proposed 2 towers on that northern end.
Right.
But we've, staff has identified that as a section plan complex, so we're looking at removing that from our next mission.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, other comments on public space? Okay, great. I think we've then, committee discussion is done. We can now move on to public comments. Do we have any virtual attendees who
We
want to
do.
talk?
We have 2. First is Ben Devanzo.
Okay, Mr. Devanzo, you're first. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, thanks everyone. I'm Ben Devanzo. I live in the neighborhood and represented the community and did surveys and things like that during the PDSP or sector plan design process. A few quick comments is I agree the width between the end buildings. Yeah, it needs to be improved, particularly as a contrast to Pentagon Row. We really need those to reflect better on each other. In addition, I like the Kent Street green ribbon. I'm reminded that I was worried about the one going between the homes. It reminds me of the pretty unsuccessful pedestrian pathway in Ballston that does really not work well. And you're right, abutting other people's apartments, and it kind of feels awkward for everyone. I don't think anyone considers that a successful space. In addition, I think that the purpose of the green ribbon really was less about being in one place, but more providing a park-to-park biophilic experience throughout the whole neighborhood, and really emphasize that is the goal, right? We want to have spaces. I've talked with the TBG folks about having community make spaces, and look forward to kind of more of those conversations during SPRC about how stoop culture is being made, how community is being brought together in this really unique insight and unique opportunity. But for the green ribbon, really the goal should be about how can we have throughout the neighborhood and throughout the site the ability to walk through nature, to be in nature, to have a beautiful, between Virginia Highlands, between the parks up on the ridge, between the parks being created in the site and elsewhere. It's really important about being able to go through that space and being in nature, in contrast with open spaces that are intended for being in, and really encourage contrasting the goal of the green ribbon with those. So I look forward to future opportunities.
Thank you, Mr. Devanzo.
And next we have Lauren Smith.
Lauren Smith. Go off mute. Okay, we can come back.
Yeah, we have in the room Jacob Hayden.
Jacob Hayden, you're up. 2 minutes.
Well, I've not lived in the River House for 30 years like you, but I am recently here from the Midwest. I love it, and the reason I love it is because it does kind of remind me a little bit back out there where land wasn't so expensive, and so you could have these kind of big open green spaces. I'm not naive to understand why they're doing what they're doing now. I mean, I can't imagine that money, that isn't tied up in the space. I think what, I want to say upsetting, but, on the periphery, we have all the parking lots. I understand, they're turning out housing. I think there's a lot of wasted space anyway. Those parking lots are, full half the time on any given weekend anyway. I think between the 3 main, Potomac, Ashley, and the James, that area where they're adding those townhouses, I think, in my opinion, that's where you kind of lose a lot of the uniqueness of the River House. In that there really, at least I think there is no place like that in Arlington and even in DC, where you have such an open space between buildings and you have such greenery that isn't taken by parks or by gardens, but is just grass and some trees, and it takes away that claustrophobic feeling that I think you get other places in Arlington, especially in DC, and I think that's why so many families like it. There's so many kids there, and I mean I'm a dog owner too, and that's why I like it too. I have some friends who are in the Navy Yard, and they have a park there, but a lot of it is concrete. A lot of it is, you have a few blades of grass where all the dogs take turns, doing their stuff on there, and you really don't have that the Ashley, or the Jam of the Potomac. And so I think losing that, and obviously I'm sure we're way past that stuff not, but I think losing that space even in between is a real shame. And I think it, lessens the uniqueness of the apartment building, where it was almost like an oasis to get away from the city. And now it's kind of all beautiful, building designs. You are kind of transferring that into what the rest of the city of Arlington and DC looks like. But really well thought out. Obviously, you guys have taken consideration. I appreciate you having open things like this. So.
Thank you. Let's move on to Chris Adams.
Yep, me. Yeah, and like I mentioned earlier, I'm in the neighborhood. I live on 16th Street, adjacent to the property. I actually walk my dog on the property pretty regularly, and right now it's just as driving my son. It's an empty parking lot. It's you have to kind of dodge broken glass and cars, and I'm really looking forward to what's going to replace it, having trails and sidewalks, and parks, and stores, and things that the neighbors can use. So I think the plan itself is a good one. And I also want to acknowledge that JBG has, met with the neighbors many times since the sector plan was passed. And we've had opportunity to weigh in, and they've incorporated some of our suggestions into the design. So that was a good thing to see. Two specific items on what we've talked about today. One, I would definitely endorse preserving that strip of green space in the southeast corner next to the Hume Steps. We use that. It's I think it's a useful amenity, even though it's not officially acknowledged as a part of the useful amenity for the neighbors. The second thing is I want to endorse what was mentioned earlier about the potential for having higher heights in the buildings that are on the north end of the property, either to add more units or potentially to deal with any massing or have more green space in that area. So I think that made sense to me as well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you much. And let's go back and one more time for Lawrence Smith. Is Lawrence Smith still on the line and wishing to talk?
Join by phone?
No.
Okay, not hearing anything. I think we're pretty much done. Our next LRPC is scheduled for October 24th. We will be discussing transportation as well as following up.
Judy Freshman just raised her hand.
Okay.
Oh, went down again. That's up.
Okay. Ms. Freshman.
Hand is up, I'm not sure why.
I just wanted to make some wrap-up remarks. I didn't know if you were going to go around the table.
But you can, since you hadn't spoken before. We'd love to hear you, Ms. Freshman.
Okay. I really want to compliment the JBG team particularly for their public outreach. I think it's been really helpful to educate this group as to give us a lot of background and to allow for feedback. Also, just remember from the sector plan saga, the Leo's and others' comments about height, and I think that my impression was there was a split the baby in half to make sure that some of the neighbors who were most concerned about height, obviously it's a business decision, but I understand how that's a compromise. Up until now, I think Penn Place has been probably the largest project that we've done. And it basically had 3 identical buildings and a helix, all pretty much the same and all by the same team. And in this case, we have a ginormous piece of property with 3 bays with many different structures and with many different uses and 3 different design teams. So it's a huge effort. And to that extent, I just wanted to comment on Matt's presentation of the schedule, which shows 3 site plans following the usual agenda, with the first one being architecture. And I have a very hard time seeing how in one session, all of the different architectural elements from 3 different design teams can possibly be adequately addressed. So I would urge the staff and the commission to consider another way of doing it, whether it's splitting it between 2 meetings, or I'm not sure how it could be accomplished, But I just don't see how it's manageable in a comprehensive and careful way to do that much architecture in one session. So I'm just speaking up now before you get too far into the planning stage to say that that element, in contrast perhaps to the green space and the transportation and other site plan issues, where it's clear that the teams are already working together. And that I can see working better, but not building design, given the variety and number of buildings. So I just wanted to plant that flag. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Freshman. I want to note that Commissioner Weir is here virtually. He had joined earlier, and I neglected to mention that. Commissioner Weir, do you have anything you want to add or say?
I do not at this point. Thank you, though.
Okay, thank you. And we have one person calling in on the phone.
Yeah. Would you mind identifying yourself, please?
Star six.
Star six.
You're on mute.
I had to unmute. I'm sorry.
No problem.
This is Doris Ray, representing the Independence Center and the disability community. I want to second the comments that were made, particularly with public open spaces and ensuring that we have an environment that is without stairs, but rather with accessible pathways, and certainly to ensure that all accessible pathways to public transit and such at the site and around the site are accessible. I wanted to also mention that I think that it's important to look at, though this is not a standard under the ADA because it's so new, the use of lighting, particularly high intensity digital lights that are used in the street spaces now in many places that are very urban, residential and commercial areas like Clarendon, for example. And putting in those high intensity lights is really a barrier to navigation for people who are blind and vision impaired. And somehow for this project, I'd hate to see that happen because many people have light sensitive disabilities. Even the most common seniors have cataracts and glaucoma, as well as other existing disabilities that combine to in bright light combine to blinding one and not helping with navigation. And I also liked the idea of ensuring around the area that that there is intuitive navigation, intuitive wayfinding present without signs, because most street signs and other signs are not visible for people with any kind of significant vision impairment, and I am assuming this is just a question that when you're talking about the architecture, that you will be talking about accessibility in the project. So I think it's important perhaps maybe to add the meetings that the last commenter mentioned to go into some detail. This is a very important development on the subway. Many people take advantage of jobs in Crystal City and Pentagon City, particularly with the federal government and contractors being here. And so I assume also later when you're talking about transportation, that you would talk about pedestrian infrastructure and such. So this is a question, do we wait to talk about that then?
Thank you, Ms. Ray. I think that means we've heard from everybody at the table and the virtual table too. And with that, I think we're done for the evening. Thank you all for coming out here. Thank you for the presentations. I think this has been a productive meeting and we've advanced the ball. So I look forward to seeing everybody in October, late October.
Thank you.
Thanks.